Shiki is a bit of an odd beast. It's a horror story which runs for nearly 2 hours before anyone is aware of the danger, and by the third act, where the show really forms a unique identity, it largely abandons its genre, transforming into what could be charitably described as a war story, but would more accurately be labeled a genocide. The lurking thread of conflict between groups is difficult to explore artistically. When creators do tackle the subject, most go for the easiest examples, providing the audience with sympathetic characters who are clearly being victimized by a stronger faction. Shiki approaches the topic from the other extreme, giving us a situation where not only is the violence rational, it's arguably necessary. The story takes a grim delight in preemptively smashing the audience's attempts to come up with a peaceful solution. The vampires cannot survive without human blood, and when a character suggests the idea of transfusions, it is immediately dismissed. Not for biological reasons, the Shiki just find it hilarious. The invasion's explicit goal is purging all human life from the village to create a vampire utopia, a goal they pursue with unwavering conviction. And near the end, it's even hard to criticize the humans for finishing off the survivors, who are almost certainly going to repeat this with another village if allowed to escape. The show acknowledges all this in the character of Seishin. After seeing how Toshio has vivisected his newly turned wife, he storms off in disgust and eventually defects to the Shiki. However, he never actually finds a better solution. And by the show's end, his sole accomplishment is helping the single most culpable person escape the consequences of her decisions. If that wasn't enough, we learn that Seishin is also misanthropic and prone to severe depression, indicating that his high standards might actually stem from feeling ambivalent towards life in the first place. It's as if the author is grabbing the audience and saying, "Stop trying to outsmart my story. The characters are trapped, so are you, sit there and deal with it." But just as you feel you understand how this all works, Shiki hits you with this.
結城君に何をする気？彼には手を出さないで。
それはできない。結城夏乃も尾崎と同様に我々に気づいてしまったんだ。
いいじゃないめぐみちゃん。彼も起き上がって仲間になるかもしれないわよ。
何言ってんのよ。あんたんとこなんか進もミキヤスも起き上がらずに腐っちゃったじゃない。ひどい。私めぐみちゃんを慰めようと。
Despite being fairly clear about which group is more justified in its action, Shiki refuses to play favorites among the individuals which make them up, and the characters are all over the map in terms of sympathetic portrayal. There are several places where you can't help but feel sorry for someone who has absolutely earned their fate, and the personal moralities on both sides are portrayed in various shades of gray. The villagers often display an enthusiasm for bloodshed which goes well beyond necessity, and more than one human gets murdered on suspicion of treason. And while few Shiki openly question the plan to take over the village, quite a few do express remorse over their actions, with a few having full-fledged personal crises. Both sides have their hawks and doves, but those are small minorities, with most participants being fodder in a conflict they just wish they weren't involved in. Only the strongest characters perceive themselves as having any choice at all. And because so few are acting as individuals, our feelings towards them have less to do with their concrete behaviors than what we perceive as their internal motivations. Probably the least sympathetic moment of the show is when Tomio, the liquor store owner, stakes his undead son with a lack of sentimentality that even the other members of his death squad found unsettling. In contrast, I would hold up the mother who killed her family in the hopes they would rise as the most sympathetic moment. Which is fascinating because not only are the actions so similar, but the one we find more off-putting has more justification. Tomio Jr. was by any measure a shithead, reveling in the vampire lifestyle from the moment he rose up, even managing to irritate Mr. Kirishiki with his cocksure attitude, where the woman's family were compassionate, neighborly people. None of that changes the reality that the woman feels grief over her actions while Tomio does not. And it seems that for the author that actually does mean something. Though even this is complicated by the fact that Tomio's lack of empathy is a major factor in how effective he is as a defender of the village, being an almost perfect opposite of Seishin in that regard. Shiki's manipulation of audience sympathy reaches a masterstroke in the reveal that the vampires are actually much weaker than humans, and are basically helpless against an enemy that knows what they're dealing with. There's a point in the story where characters are finding ways to deal with vampires. and tension is raised back up by introducing the Jinro, elite Shiki who can survive without blood, enter homes without permission, and walk around in sunlight. Observant viewers will notice that these are things that humans can already do normally. The Jinro do have increased strength and agility, but it's less of a superpower and more that they're in really good shape. Yes, Tatsuki can jump down from a 3-story building, but if you have 3 friends and a shovel, he isn't that much of a threat. Seeing the humans and Shiki swap positions so suddenly was a clever trick, and it's hard not to feel bad for them. You realize that, in their own way, the Shiki are weak, pitiful creatures who are desperately trying to survive in a world which would happily destroy them. On the whole, they have definitely earned this ass-kicking, but we can also appreciate how unfair their situation was to begin with. Despite giving every reason to believe that the humans are in a genuine kill-or-be-killed scenario, the show does plant seeds of doubt as to whether or not this really did have to happen. Even if the Shiki treat non-lethal feeding as a joke, it does seem possible. More than one human freely gives blood during the series, and creating new vampires is a multi-day process, implying that it's unusual to consume lethal quantities in one session. The divide between factions gets blurred at several points. Mr. Kirishiki is a full human who cannot be turned for genetic reasons. Seishin defects to Sunako's side after abandoning the doctor, and the villagers even have a Jinro at one point. Humans often feel lingering attachment towards friends and family they encounter post-transformation, and we see several Shiki display feelings for humans, though it's often in a self-serving way. Even Sunako, the dictator who orchestrated this whole conflict, is pretty open-minded, bonding with Seishin over her love of his writing and lamenting the number of humans that she's killed, though it never occurs to her to stop doing it. This brings me to one of Shiki's most interesting questions. To what extent can we blame the leaders and social hierarchy for the events of the series? The vampires are essentially a dictatorship organized around Sunako, who has something of a cult of personality among the upper levels of her faction. The Jinro and Kirishikis might vary quite a bit in their feelings towards humans, but they are united in their unquestioning devotion to their leader. Furthermore, the Shiki systematically enforce Sunako's values among the foot soldiers. Newly risen Shiki who express any doubts get sidelined and abused by those who want to move up the ranks, and they even have an initiation process to weed out vampires who refuse to kill. The human situation is more complicated. They are a normal group of townspeople with diverse personalities and a loose social organization. There are several members of the community who are open-minded and empathetic enough that we can imagine them giving the Shiki a chance in the right circumstances, potentially convincing their less trusting neighbors to humor an attempt at peaceful cohabitation. Unfortunately, by the time the village at large wakes up to the presence of vampires, too many people have died for most to even consider a diplomatic response. Those who are strong and capable of violence emerge as natural leaders and quickly build so much momentum that they can barely be bothered to only kill the enemy, much less question the core logic of their behavior. At the same time, the gentler members of the community are quickly pushed out of relevance, with some of the most compassionate villagers getting traumatized to the brink of sanity by a level of conflict they just aren't built to cope with. As viewers, we can imagine several combinations of human and Shiki characters who, had they met in better circumstances, could have reached an understanding. And the early episodes feature several instances of Sunako's inner circle interacting with villagers who were open-hearted and welcoming, a trust which was invariably tossed aside by the Kirishikis, who refused to be honest with humans under any circumstances ever. The precipitating event for the whole story, Megami approaching the Kirishiki mansion, was actually a perfect opportunity for connecting with human society. Megami was a self-created outcast who craved new experience and explicitly went up the hill looking for people more cultured and broad-minded than her neighbors, which the Kirishiki certainly are. And had they even considered treating her with genuine hospitality, they might have found the perfect person to help them bridge the gap. The issue of bad leadership comes to a head in my favorite scene. As the last Shiki are wiped out and the village burns, Tomio corners Sunako in the old temple. Before moving to kill her, he gives her a speech on his philosophy of how a village is supposed to work, which, at the same time, reads like a manifesto to small-town insularity, but is also extremely fair, and kind of implies that even the single most brutal human might have been open to peaceful coexistence had the Kirishikis tried to join the village rather than conquer it. At this point, Seishin rises as a Jinro and saves Sunako, who is visibly devastated and seems to be waking up to her own culpability in the destruction of everything she cared about. with this opportunity for growth being the only positive result of the descent into hell which she has pulled everyone into. I can't exactly call Shiki a favorite, or even say that it's that fun to watch, but I really respect it as a piece of media. It takes one of the most difficult premises imaginable to a full conclusion, refusing to give the viewer an easy out or compromise on believability. Shiki does get brought up as an example of quality horror anime and a great way to scare yourself, but I feel its true value runs a lot deeper than that, really being a meditation on group psychology and the interplay between individuals and the structures they participate in. And in this way, I feel that Shiki really doesn't get enough attention. Well, thanks for watching. If you haven't seen Shiki, watch it. If you have, watch it again. Thanks for looking at my video, and I will see you next time.